My name is Ann Merchant, and I work for the National Academy of Sciences. And we are very glad that you are all here, that you remembered how to get here. And of course, I do remember who I am joined by every week.
I'm Rick Levert. I'm the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is a program of the National Academy of Sciences.
Exactly. And so we are very happy to have you here for an event that we've actually been kind of planning for a while. It's probably, well, I hope it's not obvious, but sometimes we plan our events on a relatively short cycle. And that's because we've been doing these events pretty much, as you probably know, almost weekly for about a year now. And so we set ourselves that ambitious goal when we came home in March of last year. And I think we've been doing a pretty good job of keeping them going on a regular basis. And so it was really a big privilege and an honor for us to be able to get Beth Loftus, for us to be able to get on her calendar because she's very busy. And we're always extremely happy when we can get a member of the National Academy of Sciences on our stage. And of course, the National Academy of Sciences, one of its original intent was to be an honorific society, to basically kind of bring forward those members of the scientific community whose work has been especially influential. And this is a very rarefied group. There are only about 2,000 members of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, we are joined by the National Academy of Engineering and the National Academy of Medicine. Those are also very small groups of people who are recognized for their achievement over time. They have to be elected. We do sometimes get calls where people say, so where can I submit my application for membership? It doesn't really work that way. There is a whole very rigorous process by which one is nominated by someone's peer. There are sections of the Academy for the disciplines, and then people who are in that discipline nominate somebody, and then you are voted on, and there's whole selection committees. It's a very complicated time, and actually we're going into the period of time for the NAS annual meeting that is coming up very shortly. So I think that when we tell you we're very pleased when we have a member of the Academy on our stage, there aren't very many of those people, and it's a rare privilege for us. So the work of the Academy is often performed by some members of the Academy and by great numbers of people who are volunteers that sit on the committees of the Academy. We have about 6,000 or 7,000 volunteers that make up of the committees of the report committees of the work that we do. And so the staff is one part of that, but all of our volunteers are a big part of that report process that we are involved in. And of course, as we say all the time, we know that not everybody wants to read the big reports, although we do encourage you to do that if you're that interested. If you want to take that deep dive, they are all on our website, free to read and to download. But we have other ways of communicating our work, and that's where the Science and Entertainment Exchange comes in.
All right. So the Science and Entertainment Exchange, if you are a writer, producer, director, studio executive, you have a question about science while you're making a piece of mainstream media, a film, TV show, video game, book, whatever it may be, you can dial this number 844-NEED-SCI, or you can email us. And I think Sachi's going to put all that info up in one of these threads down here. Since we launched in 2008, we've done over 3,300 consults where we've brought together storytellers and filmmakers, including projects like Avengers: Infinity War, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Songbird, and Chernobyl, among others. And hey, if you are a STEM professional and you're just hearing about the work that we do, we are always looking for people to connect with storytellers. So please do reach out, and we're happy to add you to our list of volunteers. I have a few people I want to thank today. Thank you to Mandy Enriquez for doing our AV this week. You've got some rather large shoes to fill in MHA who normally does it, but you're doing a wonderful job, so thank you. The whole office in DC, Courtney Sloan and Jeff Fishman in creative engagement, and also Sachi Gerben, my colleague in LA. I also need to thank our sponsors, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, who made this event possible and all of our events, all of our live events that you see. the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Templeton Foundation, Walt Disney Company, Film Nation, Google, the Lyda Hill Foundation, Corteva, San Diego Botanical Garden, Cornell Alliance for Science, and individual donors like so many of you. And if you gave at our supporter level today, thank you so much. We will be sending you one of these. If you've not gotten yours yet and you gave at one of our previous events, it's in the mail. It's coming to you. It'll be there soon. And thank you. So today, in a moment, our prestigious speaker, Elizabeth Loftus, will take over the camera or take over your feed. And if at any point in her talk you have a question, you do not have to wait to the Q&A. You just put it either down here or up here, depending on what device you are watching this on. And I will be watching, and I will take as many questions as we possibly can. We have a limited time, and I apologize if we do not get to your question. That is my fault. But we will, during the Q&A, I'll be getting through as many questions as we possibly can. And then actually there's an extended VIP Q&A that some of you signed up for when you RSVP'd. If you have given at the supporter level, then you should have also gotten that link. If you are a retreat alumni of our writers and filmmakers retreats, you also should have gotten that link. So hopefully we will see a bunch of you there too for a live video feed, and thank you for your support. I think that's all I got right now for my spiel. So back to Anne.
Yeah, well, it's time for the rabbit hole. And so because we were going to be talking about memory, I brought my book, which I had ordered not too long ago, and it's called Our Hearts Are in France. And it literally, I mean, it's genuinely one of those coffee table books. It is full of beautiful photographs of France. And for me, and you know why this is, why my heart is in France. My son has lived for many, many years in France. He's married to a French woman. And so over the last year, I have not been able to see much of him because he is in France and can't travel back and forth easily, and I can't go to see him. And I love the country of France. It's very meaningful to me, and I love traveling around there. But for now, I content myself with pictures of this lovely book. And I'm sure there are many places that many of us can't go right now. And so looking through a book and reawakening memories through lovely photographs is something that we have to content ourselves with.
Well, my rabbit hole this week is far less beautiful, far less emotional. Mine is, so I was on eBay a few years ago, just, you know, knocking around as one does. And I found this, which I thought was really interesting. It's from 1888. I don't know if you can see this, but the Allen and Ginter Company did sort of sports stars cards that you got in a pack of cigarettes. This guy, W.J.M. Barrie, I know nothing about him. I don't know why he deserves to be immortalized, except that he could throw a 12-pound hammer 114 feet and 8 inches, which sounds pretty impressive to me. And then about a year later, I was wandering through a flea market, and what did I find? Oddly, but the actual original box that this card would have come in, which I thought was pretty cool that they came in these cigarette tins back then. So that's my rabbit hole. If you're interested in this crazy collection, Sachi posted a link.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think that, well, we each had cool things. I'm interested in yours. So thank you for bringing that.
Well, yours was beautiful. That's all I have to say about that.
So I think we were each prompted by the topic of today to sort of get something in our rabbit hole that seemed relevant and appropriate. And of course, now we'd like to turn this over to Beth. And I did want to say that, listen, there are very few times that we get to, we're really excited about hearing from you, Beth. You've been on our stage before, and we're always personally interested in hearing about what you have to say. And we know that you've done some really great work for the Academy with the committee work that you've done, and so we're really interested in hearing from you. So we're going to turn it over to you, and we welcome questions from our audience. So as Rick said, type them in, and we'll let you take it from here.
Okay, great, thanks. And it was fun hearing about your rabbit hole. So now I'm just going to try to share my screen and hope this remote thing works the way it's supposed to. And okay, so I titled this The Fiction of Memory, but I really want to start by saying that memory is pretty important. without memory, we wouldn't know how to find the keys. We wouldn't know how to make breakfast. We wouldn't know how to, walk out and take a walk. We wouldn't remember where our home is. Our memories are pretty important. And often memory serves us pretty well. But here at this time, I really want to ask this audience, do you think that I could make you remember something that did not exist? Could I make you remember, for example, that when you were a kid, you were attacked by a vicious animal? If it didn't happen, could I make you remember that? Could I make you remember that when you were a teenager, you committed a crime and it was serious enough that the police came to investigate? Could I make you remember that just a week ago, you were playing a card game and you cheated in the card game and you took money out of the bank that you weren't entitled to take? Could I make you remember these things if they didn't happen? Could I pour these ideas into your mind and make you think that these things happen to you? A lot of people will, off the top of their head will say, no, I don't think I could be made to remember that I was attacked by a vicious animal if it didn't happen. But let's see how you'll feel in another 18 minutes or so. I've been studying memory using a couple of different paradigms for studying memory in otherwise healthy human beings. And one of those paradigms is called the misinformation paradigm. So what happens here is we'll show somebody some event, maybe a simulated crime or a simulated accident. Later on, we'll supply our research witnesses with some post-event information. Often it's misleading information of some type. And then finally, we'll test people to see what it is that they remember about the event. And so we've done lots of studies, for example, where we show people car crashes and we try to supply them with post-event misinformation. In one of my early studies, we showed people an accident where a car comes to an intersection with a stop sign. And by asking a single leading question that insinuates it was a yield sign, we get lots and lots of people to believe and remember they saw a yield sign instead of a stop sign. We've even done studies where we've taken people who are, undergoing a very stressful experience, and we have supplied them with post-event misinformation, and it contaminates their memory. And so in one series of studies, we took soldiers who were learning, they were going through survival school. They were learning what it was going to be like if they were ever captured as prisoners of war. As part of their experience, they undergo this horrific, aggressive, hostile 30-minute interrogation. And afterwards, we supplied them with misinformation. And even these trained soldiers, when they were put in what we call the misled condition, they misremember the person who conducted the aggressive, hostile interview, and they even can be made to remember objects in the interrogation room that weren't present at all. And so now I've summarized for you maybe about 40 or 50 years of research on something we call the misinformation effect. This is a simple depiction of the effect in a graphic form. You supply people with misinformation and it reduces their memory performance compared to control witnesses who don't get misinformation. Out there in the real world, misinformation is actually everywhere. We get misinformation if we have seen something upsetting and we then talk to other witnesses about it. If we get interrogated by maybe a interrogator who's got an agenda or a bias about what might have happened, maybe communicates even inadvertently misinformation. We get misinformation when we look at news coverage, and there is perhaps some erroneous detail being uttered by a different person being interviewed. And in all of these cases, there's an opportunity for new information to contaminate or distort somebody's memory, even something, a memory for something that would have been pretty important. So we then, you know, a little later in my kind of research career, I began to see an even more unusual kind of memory problem where individuals were going into therapy with one kind of problem. Maybe they were depressed, maybe they were anxious, maybe they had an eating disorder, and they were coming out of this therapy with horrific memories of childhood trauma, that their parents molested them, that other neighbors or other individuals in their childhood did horrible things to them. Sometimes these memories were pretty extreme, that their relatives forced them into satanic rituals, that they were subject to satanic ritual abuse and had to kill animals and breed babies and kill babies. And despite the fact that the FBI had investigated hundreds of these accusations and found no kind of credible corroborative support for this idea of massive satanic ritual abuse, many individuals were claiming this is what they remembered. And I began to ask, you know, what is going on here? How is it that these individuals could be remembering all these things when chances are this kind of stuff never actually happened? I think that paradigm that we developed, this misinformation paradigm, where we could change memory for the details of an event that actually did happen, it just wasn't going to cut it. What we needed is something new. We needed to be able to develop a different paradigm to try to study this phenomenon, because these individuals were developing very rich false memories. And so we developed this rich false memory paradigm where there's no event to begin with, but we're going to ply people with suggestive information about the past, and then we'll test them to see what it is they remember about their childhood or even their more recent past. One of the first studies that we did with this rich false memory paradigm is to try to convince people that when they were 5 or 6 years old, they were lost in a shopping mall, they were frightened, they were crying, they were ultimately rescued by an elderly person, they were reunited with the family. And we succeeded, after just a few suggestive interviews, in getting about a quarter of ordinary adults to remember all or part of this made-up experience about being lost in the mall. After we did this study, other people responding to a challenge that getting lost is pretty common, show us you can plan a memory for something that would be more unusual or bizarre. Other scientists contributed to this literature, and they did things like one study in Tennessee convinced people that as children they had nearly drowned and had to be rescued by a lifeguard. Another study in Canada convinced people that when they were a child they were attacked by a vicious animal. Another study convinced people that when they were a teenager they committed a crime, and it was serious enough that the police actually came to investigate. You ply people with suggestion, pretty strong suggestion, and many individuals began to remember these very richly detailed but made up events. A mega-analysis was done with investigators from Canada, Britain, and the United States, that asked the question, well, how often in these studies are people falling for these suggestions? And what they did is they took a whole bunch of these rich false memory studies involving about 423 participants, and they analyzed the memory reports using a common coding scheme. And they found about 30% of the time people developed a false memory after just a few suggestive interviews, and an additional 23% developed a false belief that this had happened, even if they didn't develop a whole richly detailed false memories. Other investigators have used somewhat less powerful techniques for planning false memories, things that we see sometimes go on in this questionable psychotherapy, like guided imagination or sexualized dream interpretation or hypnosis, or exposing people to other people's memories, or plying people with false information. Other ways that scientists have planted these pretty detailed false memories. At some point, we began to ask, well, if I plant a false memory in you, does it have repercussions? Does it affect what you, your thoughts, your later thoughts, your intentions, or even your behavior? And we studied this by planting a false memory that you got sick eating a particular food. In some studies, it was eggs. In other studies, it was pickles. In other studies, it was strawberry ice cream. And when we planted a false memory in people that they got sick eating these foods like strawberry ice cream, people weren't as interested in eating those foods. When we put foods in front of people after we had planted a rich false memory about getting sick as a child, they didn't eat as much of the offending food. And so we can see here that we can plant false memories in the minds of otherwise healthy people, and these false memories have repercussions. So now you may have some questions, and I'm going to tell you about some questions that I often get from audiences when I'm talking about this kind of work. Maybe these kinds of are the questions that might be occurring to you. One common one, is there any way to tell the difference between a true memory and one that is a product of some other process, such as this suggestion or dream interpretation? You might be tempted to think that, well, maybe true memories, we're more emotional about them than our false memories. But in fact, in some studies where we've compared true memories to false memories, we find that people can be just as emotional about their false memories as other individuals are about their true memories. Maybe you think the brain can tell the difference. If we subject our witnesses to some neuroimaging, or maybe the neural signals would be able to tell the difference between a true memory and a false memory. But in fact, we have gotten people who have true memories. We've planted false memories in other people. We've put them in a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine and looked at neural signals while people are recounting true and false memories. And the overwhelming result of this work is those neural signals are very similar for the false memories as true memories. You might be wondering whether everyone is susceptible to these kinds of manipulations. Well, we did a study where we took a special group of people who have exceptional memories, highly superior autobiographical memories. They remember just about everything they've ever done every day of their adult life. They've been studied by my colleagues here at UC Irvine. They're pretty exceptional. And when these people with superior memories are compared to age, gender match controls with normal memory, we find that even these superior memory people are susceptible to these memory contamination techniques just as much as people with normal memories. So it looks like we can manipulate people's memories. We can affect their thoughts and intentions and behaviors. And of course, this raises some ethical considerations. Prominent amongst them would be, should we, when should we be using these techniques, or should we even think about banning the use? I just want to say a little bit about where I see the future of this work going. One of the newer techniques for planting false memories is to use doctored photographs. This is an easy way to plant a false memory. Not too long ago, we did a study where we showed people photographs ostensibly from the news. Here's a photograph of our former President Obama shaking the hand of the then president of Iran. Do you remember seeing that in the news? A lot of people said yes. How about this one? Do you remember when our former president, George Bush, was vacationing during Hurricane Katrina with the famous baseball player, Roger Clemens? A lot of people, yeah, I remember that. Well, those things never happened. They were created with Photoshop. And yet many people subjected to this kind of suggestion claim to have remembered seeing these photos in the news. And interestingly, your political orientation influenced the likelihood that you would develop this false belief or false memory, with the conservatives being more likely, conservative Republicans being more likely to falsely remember something that made Obama look bad, but less likely to remember something that made the former President Bush look bad. Quite recently, I've collaborated with some scientists in Ireland, and in conjunction with a referendum on abortion, where voters in Ireland were voting on whether to continue one of the world's most restrictive bans on abortion. Again, we suggested a kind of fake news to people. In one case, that people who favored the Yes campaign, which is repealing the ban on abortion, news that the opposition had committed some inappropriate behavior, or those who were kind of anti-abortion, different fake news that suggested the opposition had committed a violation. And I'm not going to walk you through this graph. I'm just going to basically tell you that lots of people fell for the suggestion, claimed to have remembered this fake news or to believe in it, and whether they fell for it depended on their prior beliefs and feelings. We're more likely to accept misinformation or fake news when it makes our opposition look bad, or another way of saying it, when it fits with our pre-existing beliefs. Talk about doctored photos. I mean, we're now seeing deep fakes as a new way of planting false memories. And with this deep fake technology, you can get people to look as if they are saying or doing anything you want them to say or do. There's a famous example that you can find on the internet where it looks like former President Obama is speaking. He's speaking, words. It's his accent, his voice, but it's not his words. The whole technology and the speech is coming from some completely different person. But to you, it looks like Obama is saying and doing these things. And this all was discussed in a fantastic article, the title of which is "Fake Media is Coming for Our Memories." So I asked you a while back, could I make you remember? Could I pour these ideas into your mind and make you believe and remember things that never happened to you? Could I make you remember you were attacked by a vicious animal as a child, that you committed a crime as a teenager, and it was serious, or that a week ago you cheated in a card game and You took money out of the game bank that you weren't entitled to take. All of these things have been planted in the minds of otherwise healthy individuals, showing that these kinds of things can and do happen, often in a sizable percentage of people who are subjected to these techniques. So if I had to leave you with one take-home message, just one message that I think after, decades and decades of working on these problems, it would really be this lesson, that just because somebody tells you something and they say it with a whole lot of confidence, just because they describe it in a lot of detail, just because they show emotion when they're telling you, it doesn't mean it really happened. You need independent corroboration to know whether you're dealing with an authentic memory or one that is a product of some other process. And such a realization, I think, might have helped a lot of the innocent people who've been convicted of crimes that they didn't do, or such a realization, I think, has made me a little more tolerant of the memory mistakes that other people make, that my friends and family make, that I myself might make. I don't immediately assume that people are lying because they could just have a false memory. And this hit home for me quite strongly very recently, just a few weeks ago, which you can read about in a New Yorker story from the April 5th, 2021 issue, where there was a description about some of the work that I've been telling you about here, and some of my early life and memories that may have possibly shaped the way I think about the work. The author of this New Yorker piece interviewed a number of my friends and family members and enemies, and I couldn't believe how many confident, detailed memories that she uncovered that were ultimately challenged by corroborating evidence. And so I've learned again this month, this lesson. It's Salvador Dali's feeling. He didn't quite get it right, but he's famous for having said the difference between false memories and true ones is the same as for jewels. It's always the false ones that look the most real, the most brilliant. If I could meet Sal today, I would say, I don't think you quite got it right. I wouldn't say the false ones look the most brilliant, but I would say that the false ones could look just as real and just as brilliant as true ones. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to any questions that you might want to ask me.
Wow, Elizabeth, that was fantastic, and thank you. I'm sure you're not surprised. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to dive right in.
Okay, sure.
So Amy and David both asked a version of how can fake memories be used for good, like maybe PTSD therapy, that kind of thing.
Well, I think that potentially fake memories could be used for good. Let me use as an example those food studies. We showed that we could plant a false memory that you got sick on a fattening food like strawberry ice cream, and people don't want to eat as much of that food. We did other studies that I haven't talked about where we planted a false memory that you, a warm fuzzy memory about a healthy food like asparagus. People want to eat more asparagus. So given that we can plant false memories, control people's nutritional choices, maybe make a dent in the obesity problem in our society, it's perhaps worth thinking about whether this could be developed into a technique where we might be able to help people live a happier, healthier life. Now, whether we can go so far as to plant false memories that can do something that would be wonderful, like fix PTSD, that's going to take a fair amount of ingenuity. But, in principle, maybe.
So Penelope asked a question I think is particularly relevant to the storytellers in the audience. What are the implications of these fictional memories on creativity? Like, do you think they help us in art and storytelling?
That's a question I've never been asked before, but could your fictional memories help you in storytelling? Well, certainly when people are describing something that didn't happen, they're telling a story, how to put that into some good use. That, I don't know, I'd have to think about that one. That I'm stymied there. I'd like to brainstorm with other people about that.
Okay. All right. Olicia asks about the evolutionary purpose to false memories.
Now that's a question I've been asked before, and other scientists who work on memory have speculated about this important issue. I'll reframe it in my own words. Why would we, whatever your theory is, why would Darwin, why would God, whatever your theory is about who made us, why would we be made in this way? Why would we be created with a memory system that is so malleable and flexible? And one answer to that question, again, it's a speculation, but a kind of an educated speculation, is that this system that we have means that when spontaneous errors creep into our memories, we learn that that's happened, we can update those memories with true information. So that updating ability to correct errors that spontaneously come in, that would be useful. Other people have speculated that some false memories might be good for us. So I didn't talk about this work, but psychologists have found and published in peer-reviewed papers work showing that spontaneously people will remember that their grades were better than they really were, or that they gave more to charity than they really did, or they voted in elections they didn't vote in, or they had kids that walked and talked at an earlier age than they really did. These prestige-enhancing memories may allow us to feel a little better about ourselves. And intriguingly, depressed people don't do that as much. So again, the false memories might maybe allow us to feel a little better about ourselves. And then I'll just give you one more thought, and this is another scientist speculation about why would we have been made in this way. Very similar brain structures are involved when people remember the past as when they anticipate the future. And when you're anticipating the future, you got to be flexible. You have to think about, you know, A could happen, or B could happen, or C could happen. And if these things happen, here's the course of action I'll take. And that flexibility in thinking about the future, possible futures, would be very adaptive. And so maybe this adaptive system that creates malleability in the past is one that allows for a flexibility for future anticipation. So those are just a few of the speculations by scientists about this important issue.
So Nancy, Valeria, Leslie, and Ariane at least have asked the question, maybe more people than that. Can false memories then be removed? Is there a process to get a false memory out after the experiment's done?
Interestingly, recently, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences just published a paper on rich false memories, some work emanating from Europe. The key authors were in Britain and Germany, maybe some other countries in Europe, because there were quite a few authors. And it's a great paper in which they planted false memories that you were, you know, injured as a child, or you had an accident, something that would have been pretty upsetting if it had actually happened. And then they introduced some techniques for trying to remove those false memories. Try to get people to really focus. What is the source of the information that you're imparting here? Or educating them a little about the false memory problem. These techniques did help to reduce the percentage of people who claim to continue to insist on the false memory. So that's pretty promising, that we might be able to take some of those ideas and take them even further, and maybe help people discriminate between, for them, something that's true and something that is a product of some other process.
Arnold asked, is there any evidence that there are people in prisons for crimes that they didn't commit but think that they did?
Now you're getting at this whole question of false confessions. If somebody's in prison for a crime that they didn't do, but they think they did, one reason why that happens is they have falsely confessed. And now there is a literature on false confessions, and there are a lot of reasons why people falsely confess to something they didn't do. Why did 200 people falsely confess to kidnapping the Lindbergh baby? Sometimes just people, are kind of lying, or maybe they have mental health issues and they just want to be part of something significant. Other people confess because they're convinced that that's the lesser of two evils. If you just admit that you accidentally shook your baby, then you'll be able to go home and see your other kids again. Otherwise, you're going to think you did it on purpose, and you'll never go home and see your kids again. So they might confess to the minor or the lesser of these two evils. But in a few cases, in some percentage of these false confession cases, there's so much suggestion that people start to really believe that they did it. And that's when the work starts to get similar to the kind of work I do. And the one Canadian study that I talked about, where a large percentage of people were led to believe they committed a crime as a teenager through this suggestive interviewing. That shows you that, it's certainly possible to do it. And we know that, we know from Innocence Project data that false confessions in known cases of wrongful conviction are important.
So Olacia, I hope I pronounced that correctly, would like to know how one might protect themselves from false memories. Is there anything you can do to combat this?
Well, you can warn people. And if people have this warning, they can sometimes fend off some of the suggestive information and not succumb to the suggestion. Problem is, we're just not walking around the planet with these warnings in the forefront of our consciousness, where they can they can help us to resist these kinds of influences. So, I've got to think a little bit more about these new results from the European study that I've just mentioned earlier in these questions, to see whether there might be some ways and some other ideas for helping people. They need to be studied to be able to do this on their own.
So Bob asked, how did you know that all of the memories were false? The drowning thing could potentially have actually been a person who had an episode like that in their childhood. Did you have a methodology around that?
First of all, the made up events in those rich false memory studies are made up with the parents of our research subject. So, and they aren't making up the idea that sometime you nearly drowned, or sometime you got lost in a big public place. It's a scenario that's about a very specific time and location with certain people present and so on. And so that is being constructed with the help of the relatives of the subject. So, it's conceivable that in some instance that a parent made a mistake and thought they were constructing a false story for us to supply to their grown child. But that it would have happened in all those cases seems pretty unlikely. The other answer we have is some of the studies have been done using memories that are impossible, couldn't have happened. And so we, for example, have planted false memories that when you were a child, you had an interaction with Bugs Bunny at Disneyland, maybe that wasn't all that pleasant. You had an interaction with Bugs Bunny. Well, that can't be because, oh, for all the entertainment people here, you already know that Bugs is a Warner Brothers character and wouldn't be interacting with people who went to Disneyland. So we have tried to plant false memories for things that just couldn't have happened as a way of ensuring ourselves that we're seeing the construction of false memories rather than somehow the resurrection of a true memory.
So Anne, Joel, and Pearl all asked a version of, are there markers for how susceptible a person may be? And Audrey and Mike specifically asked about, are there any correlations to intelligence or education?
Okay, there have been a lot of studies of individual differences. So we know, for example, that people who tend to score low on standard tests of intelligence are somewhat more susceptible to these manipulations. People who are highly cooperative and also somewhat low in cognitive ability are somewhat more susceptible. People who tend to have lapses in memory and attention frequently can't remember, did I just do that thing, or did I think about doing it? Did I mail that letter, or did I just think about mailing it? Tend to be more susceptible. But these correlations, they're not whopping. They might never exceed about 0.3 or so approximately. So they tell us that some people are a little more susceptible than others. But we also have to keep in mind that we've documented false memories in people who are highly intelligent, highly educated, highly experienced. And, I've got just a small collection of some very famous people that we share this planet with who have developed some pretty rich and, for a while, embarrassing false memories.
So Emily asks, whether it's everyday life or if you're sitting on a jury, are there any sort of telltale signs that there might be a false memory or misinformation in play to what you're hearing?
And again, just listening to somebody's recounting their experience, the things that we're impressed by, like if they're confident, or if they're detailed. People love detailed memories, and they tend to be really impressed with detail and confidence and even emotion. But as I indicated earlier, false memories can have these same characteristics. So we can be misled if we just respond to the detail and confidence. I mean, I come back to that experience that I've had, working with this writer for the New Yorker, a magazine, where, one of my relatives was just absolutely so confident about a fact that was different from my memory. And she was so detailed and confident, and it was a detail that was pretty important to me. But it ended up that corroboration showed that my relative was wrong. And the corroboration was in the form of a newspaper clipping that was published at the time, and some diary entries that were recorded at the time. So, again, I've just experienced recently the idea that somebody, I care about a lot and who's a fine person and a relative of mine can can have a false memory, as can I.
So Lawrence asked the question, I'm going to broaden it out just a little bit. He wants to know about attorneys planting false memories in witnesses, but just generally in the legal system. I'll broaden it out to, police interrogation and just throughout. Do you see a lot of examples of this happening in courtrooms?
It's not so much in the courtroom that you have to worry about, because in the courtroom, a lot of people are watching. But you don't have a lot of people watching what happens before you get to the courtroom. So I know, for example, from studies that I didn't talk about here, that if I want to ask people about the speed of cars that were involved in a car crash, that if I ask a question like how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, I'm going to get a higher estimate of speed than if I ask how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. That's a scientific, observation. Well, lawyers or investigators or people who are interviewing witnesses, if they want the speed to be greater, they can ask the smash question. If they want the speed to be less, they can ask the more neutral hit question. And nobody is often watching or recording what goes on in those pretrial interviews of witnesses. So we probably don't know the extent to which there has been some contamination of witness memory long before anybody gets in the courtroom, where kind of all eyes are on you. And somebody may try to stop you from asking those kinds of leading questions. Lawyers will still do it. Lawyers will still do it in depositions and other places where the exchanges are being recorded and transcribed. But they might then get called on it.
So I think those kinds of interrogations also maybe lend themselves to Jim's question, which is, how does your emotional state impact your ability to have a false memory implanted?
I think you have to think about the emotion at the time of an event itself, and then the emotion at the time that somebody is trying to retrieve information from memory. It's kind of complicated, but I think if I had to summarize a big body of work, I would say that with extreme arousal, emotion, fright, there can actually be an impairment in what gets stored in memory. And with extreme arousal, upset, or even fright, it can certainly affect the accuracy of retrieval. I mean, I'm even reminded of a time when when I was living and teaching at the University of Washington, living in Seattle, and I went out to get into my car in the morning, and somebody had bashed the windshield, broken it, and stolen the radio out of the car. And I rushed back into the house and called 911 to report this. And the 911 operator said to me, now is this, are you calling, is this a house or an apartment? I said, it's an apartment. And then I stopped myself. No, it's not. It's a house. I've been living in this house for years. And I've experienced for myself what it's like to be highly upset and answer a question that you certainly know the answer to and give a completely wrong answer. It's just an example.
So we've got maybe a minute left, and so I might be able to get two questions in. So Kathy asks about sort of the nuts and bolts of implanting memories in these sessions. Can you describe, the room and how you're doing it, and do you just repeat something over and over, or how do you generally do it?
Well, let's talk about the rich false memory study. So Rick, let's say you're my subject. I would say, Rick, we've had a conversation with your mother. We found out some things that happened to you when you were about 5 or 6 years old. We'd just like to ask you about these experiences. And, if you don't remember what your mother has told us, just say, I don't remember that. If you do, tell us anything you remember about the experience. Then we might present to you 3 true experiences, things your mother told us really did happen to little Ricky when he was 5 or 6. And then a made up experience about, well, let's say you were lost in a shopping mall. It was in a particular place. We last saw you by the pet store. It was, you were there with your sibling and your mother. You were ultimately found after an extended time. An elderly person had found you and brought you to the main office. Do you remember any of that experience? So it's a scenario that ostensibly it's been told to us by your mother, along with some true experiences that really did happen to you. That's an example of a pretty strong form of suggestion that has successfully worked to create these rich false memories. And I think that was the kind of method also that was used in this recent European study that I've alluded to on false memories that was just published in PNAS.
I think that's all the time we have for right now. Some of you will be joining us also in the VIP Q&A. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. This was
My
amazing.
pleasure.
We had 130 questions just about for you, so I got to as many as I could get to.
Oh, maybe you can send them to me. I like to see the questions people ask.
We'll see if we can
See if you can
get those for
gather
you.
them up.
By the way, that mall thing really did happen. Really did happen. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Anne, I think now it's your time to come back. There you are.
I'm back. I'm here. And thank you so much, Beth. That was really wonderful. And as we knew, very provocative. I think that's one of the reasons we received so many questions, and because there are so many implications to this. Science often is not straightforward. There are nuances to a lot of the science that that we put on our stage, but it's one of the reasons that we do that. We want there to be good, healthy discussions, and we want people to have the opportunity to ask the researchers who are doing this work directly to be able to better understand it. So we are grateful to Beth for being here, and we're grateful to our audiences for asking these good questions. We will not be having a program next week because instead we have a really, really big program at the National Academy of Sciences next week. All of you did receive an invitation to the Nobel Prize Summit. And so if you've signed up for that, fantastic. If you haven't, there's still time to do that. It is a 3-day event, although really about a day and a half on our main stage. And so go ahead and sign up. It promises to be really good. Come for a little bit, come for all of it. We'd love to see you there. So I think that's, for those of you who are coming to the VIP Q&A, we'll see you over there, but otherwise we'll see the rest of you, I don't know, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, sometime in May. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the time off.
Exactly. Bye.
Bye-bye.